Hey, brothers and sisters, welcome to The Port. We're going to go through Hebrews chapter 12 today. I'm really excited to share this with you. There's so much that I want to unpack in this chapter that I had to make it into a two-parter. So that's the reason it is a two-parter. So anyways, let's just get right into it. Starting in verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. Now, I just want to start to unpack just this one verse alone. Let's just start to unpack some of this stuff. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down. He is talking about the requirements of the law. Let us strip off the requirements of the law. The requirements of the law are like having stones on rocks, boulders on you that slow you down from walking, from running the race. He says, strip off those things that slow you down. Strip off the law. Strip off the law. The requirements of the law. That stuff slows you down. And he says, the sin that so easily trips you up. What is the sin that's tripping them up? Is unbelief, is the lack of trusting. So he's saying, remove the requirements of the law, throw off the sin, unbelief, start believing the Lord, and then run your race with endurance. Let's run with endurance. So how do we do that? He answers that by the next verse 2, where it says, he goes, let me read the verse 1 again, the very last part. And let us run with endurance the race God has set before us. We do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus. Listen to this. The champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. So how do we run with endurance? Keeping our eyes on Jesus. Listen to this. Who is the champion who initiates and perfects our faith? What does he mean by that? He is the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. It starts with Jesus as the one. This salvation, this plan, it starts with Christ and it ends with Christ. Christ is the one that works it, that starts it in you. He is the one that saved you, sanctified you. He is the one living in you, and he is the one that's going to complete that work through you. It starts with him. He is the one that initiated, and then he is the one that perfects it, finishes it. Because it is Christ who sustains us, it is Christ who sanctifies us. And we could be confident that whatever he started, he's going to complete to the end. Hope that was clear. Verse 3. Think of all the hostility he endured from sinful people. Then you won't become weary and give up. After all, you have not yet given your lives in your struggle against sin. Now, this translation doesn't really capture what's being said here, so I'm going to paraphrase it for you. He's basically saying, think of Jesus and everything he went through with people who didn't believe in him, okay? And that should encourage you, especially think about this, he's saying, you have not faced persecution to the point of death. He's basically saying, you have not faced persecution to the point of death, you are still alive. He's basically saying, you have not died for the sake of the gospel. That's what he's basically saying to them in that verse. Very important to understand that. Verse 5. And have you forgotten the encouraging words God spoke to you as his children? He said, my child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as a child. Now, the word here, discipline, the English word discipline, that word is related to the word disciple. And it hints at the original meaning of the word. To discipline actually means to tutor or to train. It's related to the word paiduo. That means to train up a child. it is a positive word. It's not a negative word. It has nothing to do with punishment or judgment. So he's talking about, when he's talking about discipline, he's talking about training. The word discipline there is training. In the context, okay, in the context of 4, 5, and 6, okay, the author is talking about the persecution and the possibility of them shedding the blood or dying for the gospel. So you haven't really died or you haven't been persecuted or even died for the sake of the gospel. The danger is not that they might fail to endure and then be casted away or lose their salvation or not become sons anymore. No, the danger is of them becoming weary, of growing weary. That's what's being said here. That he was saying, don't grow weary and lose heart. And to help us endure, we need to change our perspective, he's saying to them. Change your perspective. Don't see yourself as victims. Look at it as training, okay? This wouldn't be happening to you. Except it's happening. Basically, this wouldn't be happening to you if you were not the children of God. He's basically saying, this is happening to you because you are the children of God. That's why you're experiencing these persecutions, okay? Just like they persecuted Christ, they're also persecuting you. Hope that makes sense, okay? But we're going to unpack verse 5 a little more because there's something that's really, I didn't know, and as I was reading and then studying the commentary, there was just an interesting insight of this particular passage here. So let's go back to verse 5 and 6, and I want to pick it up halfway where it says, he said, my child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, training, and don't give up when he corrects you. Verse 6, for the Lord disciplines or trains those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as a child. Now I want to read verse 6 from the New King James Version, okay? It says, for whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. Now, what's being quoted in verse 5 and 6 is actually comes out of Proverbs chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. And I'm going to read those verses to you. This is out of the New Living Translation. It says, my child, don't reject the Lord's discipline, and don't be upset when he corrects you. For the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. Now, did you notice in that passage of Proverbs, they don't use the word punishment or scourge. Okay, it's not mentioned in that proverb. That word is not used. It's not even seen. And no matter what translation, if you go to Proverbs 11 and 12, chapter 3, 11 and 12, you see that the word scourge or even punishment is not even used or mentioned. The original quote of the passage is, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. Somehow the word correct got changed to scourge, which is really weird. In the New King James, well, the New Living uses the word punish. But I want to focus on this particular word, the word scourge, which, both words completely change the meaning of the proverb. What's so weird about the particular word to scourge, which is the word that really is the one used in other translations, not in the New Living, but in the other translations, they use the word scourging. A scourging was a first-century punishment reserved for slaves and criminals. It was never used on sons or citizens. Every time the word appears in the New Testament, it is associated with unjust punishment, afflicted upon the just, relating to Jesus and his followers. So to say that God scourges his sons is to suggest that God was just as wicked as the Roman, and we know that isn't true. So why does the Greek text say he scourges? That's what we're going to get into. Why does he say that why does it use the word that says he scourges? Well, the evidence suggests, okay, that the original proverb was probably misquoted or miscopied. The Aramaic version of the New Testament, which may predate the Greek text, says God draws aside. There is a translation called the Passion Translation, okay, which is actually an English Bible based on the Aramaic text. And it translates this passage as, when he draws you to himself, it proves you are his delightful child. Some church fathers believed that the book of Hebrews was written in the original language, in the Hebrew language, okay? So, and according to Dr. Andrew Farley, there is an ancient Hebrew word that can mean either to scourge or to inquire into. So one way to read this passage is, God disciplines or trains and inquires deeply into us for the purpose of revealing what's inside. What does that mean? Well, there's a beautiful illustration that Jesus, a parable that Jesus gave, the parable of the prodigal son. And when the son basically demanded his inheritance, he had a very wicked attitude towards his father. He basically wanted his father dead. He says, "I want my inheritance now." But the father didn't punish him or even stone him as he had the right according to the law. He was actually required according to the law. You read that in Deuteronomy, that the son's attitude, the father could have retaliated and judged the boy. Instead, what did he do? The father released the son. He loved the son unconditionally and let him go, And then at the end, when he repented, he came back and the father loved him and saved him, okay? What he's talking about there is the way that God uses difficulties. He surrenders us to difficulties. He surrenders us. And we see this. This is the experience of the Christian life. We struggle. And God lets us run. And then when we fail, we come to God and then we see his grace. That's the reality of the Christian life. The constantly experiencing how faithful and how good God is. That's how you grow confident in the Lord. That is what's being addressed in this passage. Isn't that amazing? That's what's being talked about here. That God trains, that the way that God helps us for us to be confident. The way that God trains us, that we can be confident in him, is that he allows persecution to come. He allows us to even run into our own. Either we're being persecuted or we create our own persecution. He allows that to happen, and then he shows us his love through that by delivering us, by saving us, by coming to our rescue. That's what's being communicated here. Isn't that a beautiful thing? That God loves us so much that he uses, that's what was the original intent of that passage, that God uses trials and challenges to train us, that we may know the depths of his love. Isn't that a great thing? That's awesome stuff, isn't it? Let's continue. Verse 7. As you endure this divine discipline, remember that God is treating you as his own children. As his own children. Who ever heard of a child who is never disciplined, trained by his father? Again, this is amplifying what we just talked about early. God uses persecution. God uses trials to teach us about grace. God uses these things to help us grow and understand. It's about training, helping you to grow. He encourages you. He uses these things to teach you about his life and his love for you. Okay, that's what's being addressed here. So let's continue to read. Verse 8 through 13. If God doesn't discipline you as he does all of his children, it means that you are illegitimate and you are not really his children at all. Since we respect our earthly fathers who discipline us, shouldn't we submit even more to the disciplines of the Father of our spirit and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they know how. But God's discipline is always good for us, so that we might share in his holiness. How do we share in his holiness? Okay, this is very important. As we learn, as we're going through trials, as we're being persecuted, as they were going, okay, you realize, Lord, I can't do this. I can't overcome. I can't do this. You trust the Lord. You're living by his life, and his life is holy. You accept when the enemy comes and accuses you, again, you could say, Lord, you're right. I am. This outside of you is unholy, but because I'm in you, I am holy. When I learn to live by his life, when I learn to walk by faith, I share in his holiness. Trials help me share in his holiness. I hope that made sense. Let's continue to read. Verse 11. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterward, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. So take new grips with your tired hands, strengthen your weakened knees, your weak knees, strengthen your weak knees, mark out a straight path for your feet so that those who are weak and lame will not fall but become strong. I like that last part here in verse 11. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening, but it's painful. But afterwards, there is a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained this way. How do we live righteous? When we're going through persecution, when we're trying to save ourselves, we crash and burn. But when we give up, Lord, I can't do this, then we start living righteously. Lord, help me to overcome. Lord, you are my righteousness. So because you're my righteousness, I'm going to move towards righteousness, and you are going to become my strength. That's what's being said here. It's great stuff here. So let's just stop right here, and we'll pick up part 2 the next time we meet. Anyways, God bless you guys. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and please leave a comment. We'd love to dialogue with you. God bless you guys.